The carnivore diet cured me of my sugar addiction. I know it can help you as well. Hey, what's shaking bacon? My name's Bruno Panucci. I hope you're doing well. So if you wouldn't mind hitting the little subscribe button or even the little bell, it doesn't cost you anything to hit the little bell or the like icon, and it really helps support the channel. I really appreciate that. So we'll get right into it. I was dealing with sugar addiction for years and years before I even knew it was a thing. Since I was a little kid, I bet you since I was, 5, 6, 7 years old, I used to deal with sugar addiction. I used to just love putting sugar on my cereal if I could, because my parents used to buy cornflakes and Rice Krispies, the most bland flavored cereals you could get on the market. And it was so horrible and they tasted bad. You just had to just put sugar on them. But that was probably the beginning where I noticed I just couldn't get enough sugar. When I was a kid, we also had a lot of Kool-Aid, and my parents probably thought it was a healthier choice or it was a really cheap thing to help the kids have something to drink whenever we wanted, and we could make our own. But you used to put a cup of sugar in each container of water with the Kool-Aid, and we drank a ton of it when I was a kid. Now, I wasn't overweight as a kid until I was 10 years old. At that point, I remember I always loved junk food and ice cream and candy, you name it, like any other kid. But what I noticed was I was starting to put on weight. I didn't understand why. I was in grade 6 when it started happening, and I was putting on weight horribly fast. I remember in grade 6, I was already 160 plus pounds in grade 6. By the time I was in grade 9, I was over 300. By the time I started losing weight, the scale only went up to 315 pounds, and it'd kind of loop around, and I was up to, going by the clothes sizes I was wearing, probably around 400 pounds. All that by the time I was 16. And I was addicted to it. I couldn't get enough pop. I had I would say an addiction to the aspartame. I was having 6 to 8 cans minimum of Coke in a day. On hot summer days, it was much worse than that. And it wasn't until my early 20s, when I cut back dramatically on pop and started having juice. Well, juice and water. And I started really increasing my water intake. But the juice I thought was a healthier choice. Now, I learned in my nutrition class in college that wasn't really a much healthier choice. It was pretty much a lateral move. And I didn't learn till my mid-late 30s when I saw a doctor north of Toronto that was dealing in sugar and carbohydrate addiction, that I actually had an addiction to carbohydrates. I always noticed the symptoms of the addiction, but never actually thought of it as an addiction. Can you relate to any of this, where you try to cut out sugar for a day or two and your energy is just zapped? You feel incredibly weak. You can't stop thinking about your next meal because it's usually full of carbohydrates, and you just crave anything that's in front of you, and you have to push it away from you. You have to stay away from all that. You don't want it in your house. You don't want it anywhere around you, because if you're around it, you will go crazy with it. The headaches really start getting to you by the end of the day. It's like you're detoxing. You're going through a withdrawal. Your sleep suffers. There's all sorts of symptoms you go through, and the craving seems to be the worst for most people. And every time I tried to cut out sugar, I went through something like that every single time. So when I first did it with this doctor, I did it straight for a year, not a lick, taste, or bite of anything off this way of eating. And then as time went on, I started trying to reintroduce it, and it didn't go well. By the beginning of the 3rd month, I just crashed, and I was having my portion sizes out of control again, and I was giving into every single temptation. When you have an addiction to sugar, I always liken it to both an alcoholic and a smoker. If you go back to sugar and you're trying to cut it out, and you realize you have an addiction. This is how you can realize you have an addiction. You can't moderate it. You have to abstain from it. And it took me years to understand I had to abstain from sugar. And then I spent years longer trying to negotiate through that. It's just like a smoker with a cigarette. If they quit smoking and they have a cigarette after 6 months or even 6 years, all it takes is that one cigarette, and they could fall right back into smoking. Some people occasionally can have that one cigarette and it won't really do too much damage. But the vast majority of smokers, when they have that one cigarette a long time later, they can't help it. They go back to it. As soon as you have that substance that feeds that addiction, you calm down, you crave it, and you just kind of get this sort of sensation where you just relax. And this is something you deal with day in, day out. When you're stressed, it might be more of an issue. When you're not stressed, you just crave this food. It's like a comfort food. I didn't even realize how it was such an issue. I knew my portion sizes were grossly out of control, but it didn't seem to bother me. I ate it, and it was just the way it was. And I was having junk food pretty much all day, every day, along with some real food in there. But the problem as well was carbohydrates in general would help feed this sugar and carbohydrate addiction. So if I had a bunch of potatoes or rice or anything like that, French fries, that still kept that sugar craving alive. It just didn't feed it the way, say, M&Ms did or some other junk food. So what I had to do was cut all of it out, and carnivore made that happen. But like I said before, the craving can be like a alcoholic deals with alcohol. They can abstain for a while and they can do okay. And I know smokers go through this too, but smokers give into every single craving, right? You give into it, and no matter how often you have this craving, you want to give into it. And that's the way it works with sugar addiction. The way it's more like an alcoholic with me is I need to abstain. So like an alcoholic, I would abstain for so long, maybe days, weeks, or months, and eventually I'd fall right back into it. One drink, that's all it takes for an alcoholic, because when they have that one drink, they have to keep on going. They can't stop. And that's the way my sugar cravings went. Unlike a smoker, they could have their one cigarette and be okay for like maybe an hour or a couple hours. I needed to just binge with my addictive substance. Can you relate to that? I know that's something I went through. I know that's something I've heard a lot of other carnivores say they went through when they were cutting out sugar. It's a difficult thing for people to get over. After I went sugar-free for a year and I went back to carbs, I even had a major heart attack, and I still couldn't stop my portion sizes and my sugar cravings. And it took me from 2016 to 2021 before I actually cut out carbohydrates. In that time frame, I knew it was an addiction, but I was trying to manage it. I was trying to have it a little bit each day, or a little bit once a week, or a little bit with each meal. I was trying to justify having it in there. And when you make excuses like that and you have a rationale behind it, you're thinking, okay, I'm just going to try and manage this. No matter how you're trying to manage it, the problem is you're trying to manage an addiction. And sometimes when it comes to addiction, in fact, most times when it comes to addiction, you have to abstain. Now, if you don't deal with an addiction to carbohydrates and you can moderate, it's not an issue for you, right? But for those of us, and I think it's really the vast majority of people, are abstainers. Most people who are abstainers know they're abstainers. And all the other people who are moderators, I think a large part of the people in that pool are trying to moderate, but they really can't. They give in to temptations. If you decide you want to have something off a carnivore diet and you can manage that once a week or once a day, and it's just like a little, a cookie, just say a cookie, and you can have that once a day, and that's like your daily allowance, or maybe it's an apple. Well, I think that's great. You're a moderator. But when you're craving that and you're thinking about it all day, or you give in to the slightest temptation for that, well, it might be a different story. And so how do you know whether you're a moderator or an abstainer? That's one of the easiest ways to find out. When you can't stop the urge, when one, just having the urge is an issue, and two, you can't control the urge, and three, you give into the urge. Maybe you don't give into it all the time, but you give into the urge. You should be able to cut anything out of your lifestyle or diet, and it shouldn't affect you that way. If you wanted to cut out ribeye, well, it might be difficult for carnivores, but if you wanted to cut out ribeye or bacon or just a regular steak or ribs or something out of your diet for a week or a month, most people don't go through withdrawals from that. Even if they really, really like that thing, you don't go through withdrawals. You don't start getting headache and lethargic, and you don't start maybe feeling a little grumpy towards people. I never went through the grumpiness, but people have different symptoms, and there's some common symptoms, and we'll go over them now. So like I said, your energy, cravings, some people will bloat. They'll even get muscle pain and insomnia. So it's affecting your day-to-day life as well as your sleep. So it's really going to have a huge impact. And what we need to do is recognize it and manage it. The carnivore diet cured that of me. I don't have those problems anymore. I can be around my favorite old junk foods and foods that I used to love to eat, and it doesn't faze me. You can let carnivore do that to you too. You just have to make that leap. You have to stay full on the foods you're allowed to eat, but we'll get into a little bit more of that later. There's lots of reasons why you might go to these sugary foods. It might be emotional eating. It might be because you have low willpower when it comes to sugar, and that's one of the clearest ways you might know if you have a sugar addiction. Or it could just be the fact that you love filling yourself up on this food. You crash on it afterwards. You eat a lot and then you go, oh, maybe you don't even feel guilty sometimes, but it still has an impact on you emotionally in one way or another. So what are some things you can do to help manage this? One, starting a carnivore diet. If you're trying to do keto and you're dealing with sugar addiction, it's going to be difficult. That was my experience, because you still get to have some artificially sweetened foods in there. And I couldn't manage that. And I had a rough time sticking to keto because of that. I think keto is great for a lot of people. If you can manage sugar and carbohydrates and you don't have that addiction, run with that. But if you're having a rough time managing your portion sizes or the frequency when you're having these treats, then maybe you need to go a little more strict for a while. And carnivore is a great way to go for that. So lots of people might have different advice about how to start carnivore, and you might want to find one that resonates with you. I have one I think you need to do if you're dealing with an addiction, but there's some different ways. You can start switching to artificial sweeteners in the beginning if you want. I personally wouldn't, but if that's going to make it a little easier for you, then go in that route, but try cutting out all other junk food. If you can try to stick with real food for the vast majority of the meals that you have, or even all the meals, and still keep some artificial sweetener in your coffee because you just feel like you need it and you don't want to tackle too much at once, you can try doing that as well. But that's also admitting that you have a bit of a sugar addiction, right? Because it's going to be that much of a challenge for you. And people don't often wind down before they go into a carnivore diet when they're dealing with a sugar addiction. It becomes an all or nothing thing. Whatever consequences might come down the line later on, when you're dealing with an addiction, that's the first thing you have to deal with. I know with a carnivore diet, I have to abstain. And so when you have to abstain and you have to make that switch over to a carnivore diet, you have to cut everything out. It's just as simple as that. You have to cut everything out. Maybe you have to get rid of the food from your house. Maybe you have to ask your family for support so that they don't have that food just for the first few weeks or maybe the first few months. They love you. They'll do that for you. That's what they're there for. They want to help you succeed, and they won't help you crash and burn when you say, I just want to get a pizza tonight. No, don't let them do that. Tell them beforehand, don't let me do this. I need your help. I want to be strong with this. Because after a while, these cravings go away. And once the cravings go away, you become sort of bulletproof. I could sit in front of my favorite food. I don't care how hungry I am. It's not an issue. I have no temptation for it, and I won't eat it because I know if I do, I won't be able to stop eating that food. And then all my health problems will come back. They're not gone. My health problems aren't gone. People's health problems don't get cured from carnivore. They go into remission. So I want that to happen with you. So reach out. Let me know if you have any carbohydrate or sugar addiction problems. Most of the people that do carnivore diet often have these problems. Mention it in the comments below. Thanks a lot, and I hope you keep well. And please, once again, give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. Take care.